Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the strongest weapon that the United States of America has. You probably also heard about the phrase, when America sneezes, the whole world catches flu. Now that means simply, what that means is really, what is the most strongest weapon in the world that America has is not a natural nuclear bomb or whatever you may be thinking. It's something that is as simple as just the US dollar. I'm going to talk about how US dollar became a superpower, and then how today it is a superpower, and what's happening in the future, and what's sort of entailed, and how it's going to proceed, and how things are going to move forward with the US dollar. So firstly, to understand exactly how US dollar became a superpower and a super currency and where it is today, is to understand the first thing, which is the Bretton Woods Agreement. In 1933, President Hubert came with this phrase, said, if we have gold, we cannot trust the government, which simply what he entailed was trying to peg gold to the standard currency, to make it a gold standard. Later, after World War II had finished, Bretton Woods Agreement came into place, where every other country in the world, like the UK, France, or the entire European Union, everyone was financially struggling except for America, because during the time of World War II, America was the only one who was actually manufacturing heaps of weapons and selling it across the world and accumulating all the gold in return and all those sort of things. So by the end of World War II, America was a superpower as compared to all the other countries, and had the most amount of gold. It had about 70% of gold reserve in the world at the time. So because other countries were poor and they didn't have a way of having a standard currency, and they didn't have enough gold to peg their currency to the gold, what America said was that they are going to peg American dollar, which is going to be the USD, to gold. And other countries like the UK, France, Japan, China, and everyone can peg their currency to the US dollar. So that's what a gold standard is known as, where the US currency is pegged to the gold. So as much gold you have, that's the amount of money you can print, and that's the amount of money that will be circulating in the market. And then from there, the other countries will be circulating their currency, which will be pegged to the US dollar. So the exact amount of US dollar there is in the market, there's the exact amount of money that their countries will be serving. During Bretton Woods, we understood there were two main pillars, which firstly was international support, which is what America had, because they were sort of the superpower, and second one was the gold standard, which I just explained to you. That is what formed the Bretton Woods Agreement, and that's how US dollar became the hegemony, the superpower, and kept going till chapter 2, which I'm going to discuss now. In 1970s, when America went to Vietnam War, they obviously had chewed a lot more than what they could afford to, and then they came to a point where they had the amount of gold they were using was diminishing very quickly at a very fast pace. So they decided that they can't keep going with this gold standard, and they need to replace the gold standard. But if they do replace the gold standard, that means simply that they will be replacing the entire balance of the world, where US dollar is the superpower. So they did the smartest thing that anyone could do is, you remember how I told you there were two strong pillars, which was international support, which, you know, everybody was giving them still, because they were still the superpower, but the gold standard was something that they cancelled out. And instead of gold standard, what they did was something known as the Petrodollar Agreement. So Petrodollar Agreement is essentially that America decided that instead of, they took down the gold standard, and then they, at the same point in time, erected a new tower, a new pillar, which is known as the Petrodollar Agreement, where within the Petrodollar Agreement, all the oil in the world will be bought by the US dollar. Now, you understand how this already validated the US currency and gave it more power in future, because until recently, about 70% of the world's oil was being bought, actually probably more than that, was being bought by was only being traded by US dollar. So countries like Saudi and Iraq and all those Middle Eastern countries that do supply oil were supplying oil with US dollars. Even Russia at some point in the 2000s was supplying oil with US dollar. It's only recently that the US dollar has been replaced by Saudi to China and to India and to Russia because of other reasons. But until recently, only because of the petrodollar agreement, all the oil in the world was getting exported by US dollar. Now you understand how there are two main pillars that I spoke about, which is the international support and the oil money. Now this is what bolstered the confidence in the US dollar for all the people, for all the countries in the world, even Australia. For example, when Australia trades with Japan or any other country, they trade in US dollar. Because why? Because, you know, if you think about an example, it is that Australia would be like to Japan, for example, to trade with something would be like, okay, well, how about we use Australian dollars to trade? And Japan goes like, no, how about we use yen? So they both have arguments about which currency to use. So instead of, to avoid this argument, they decide, wait a minute, there's a strong currency in the world, which is the US dollar, which is circulating in the world because of the petrol anyway. So how about we trade other goods and services with the US dollar as well? Now, because of that, 60% of the trade, of the world's trade, is in USD. Now, do you understand how this puts US dollar into such a strong position? It just puts it in a position to become the hegemony already, because everyone has given it support, everyone has given it a consideration to be something of value. Like recently when Zimbabwe have had a hyperinflation, when and other countries, for example, in South America had a hyperinflation, they were using US dollars even for their currency, within their country, they were still using US dollar because it has such a strong value, it has such a strong belief that US dollar will remain the currency that can be used around the world. Because at the end of the day, what currency really is just a piece of paper for what you trade to get the goods or services that you're expecting. So the vendor that you go to get that goods and services, he needs something that also has value. So that's where the value comes in place, because everyone has given it an international support and has recognized it as a super currency. That's why everyone trades in US dollar. Now we're going to go to chapter 3. Now we've obviously heard about the phrase that with absolute power comes absolute corruptness as well. So once US dollar became an absolute superpower, obviously there was absolute corruption as well. When COVID-19 happened, we have gone through a period of superinflation, where we've seen things have just inflated to a whole new level. That being assets, being your normal groceries, vegetables and foods and everything. This is because during COVID-19, what happened was that we're going to be explaining within the chapter 3, which is printing machine. What I mean by printing machine is that during the COVID-19 situation, America, that was once upon a time, which still is the largest economy in the world, it had 1/4 of its GDP contributed to the world's economy, which is a huge thing. Suddenly collapsed, declined, 32% of its GDP declined. They had huge losses across all the industries, huge unemployment issues. What could government do at the time was only to print money. The feds in America are the only ones that can print money without any further consequences, because in Australia, for example, if the RBA prints more money, the inflation will go up, obviously because of simple reasons of supply and demand. If there's more supply of the money, there will be less demand, and a piece of toast would cost you, instead of being $2 to $5 or whatever it is, it will cost you $15 just because the government's printing money. But in America, it's different, because once America starts printing money, since it is the supreme currency in the world, it can print it can essentially print unlimited amount of money, because what happens is that within printing money, when you're printing money, this concept is actually, by the way, known as quantitative easing. When there's an excessive amount of money in there being printed, the value of the assets just rises immensely, and it doesn't, the balance between the two can't be caught up because of excessive amount of printing of money. What happens is, during this process of printing money, isn't just simply that you start printing money in thin air. What happens is, when USA prints money, when USA starts printing money, they issue something known as debt instruments known as bonds. Bonds are security treasuries that are issued by the US feds to other countries, to other people. Anybody can purchase it. You can purchase it. Anybody can purchase bonds. And other countries like China, India, Japan, and all those other Asian superpowers, they go ahead and buy these bonds, because they know that US bonds are a debt instrument once they, reach their maturity age. This is a whole different concept and a whole different video to talk about. But simply, what you need to understand is that when the US dollar is printing money, they're also issuing debt instruments known as bonds out. With those bonds, US dollar can be printed. So if the US dollar decides that, yep, one bond, or however they may put it, is worth $1 million, they can start printing $1 million worth of money, because that is the debt they have given out. That's why they also have such a high debt as well, and they have a debt ceiling where they can only print a certain amount of money as well. But infinitely, they do print a lot of money, and what happens because of that is QE, which I just described, which is a simple but a hard concept to get a grab of, which is quantitative easing. Because of this quantitative easing principle, what really happens is that the government will keep printing money, the asset values will keep going up, because there's a huge amount of influx within the population, within the market of money. This is what we have seen within the COVID period, when there was excessive amount of money, and everyone thought that the markets are going to shut down because everyone's going to get laid off and all this sort of stuff. But what happened was, government started printing intense amount of money, and there was a huge influx of money within the market. They started issuing stimulus packages out within the market, which just pumped the economy with so much money that the asset value shot up, because everyone just had this money coming out of their ass, and no one was really doing anything with it but buying property. And that's how the property value in Australia also went up, and other asset values and the stock market values in the America went up. Now, I'm just going to tell you that QE is a concept that the government will keep implying, and as we currently speak in America, Fed cut the rates. That means they're printing more money, which means the asset values are going to go up again. Now, this is a cycle that government came up with after 2008 collapse of the housing market, when they realized that what really killed the market was blocking too much credit. Since then, the government never wants that collapse to happen again, because if a collapse of that size happens again, it will be a way bigger level as compared to what it was in 2008. In today's time, it will be way bigger level. Government would never want to do that. So QE is going to keep happening. Government's just going to keep printing money, and assets are just going to keep rising. People are contemplating and always saying how housing market in Australia will crash. Let me tell you, this is one of the reasons why the government will never let the housing market crash. If it crashes, it will directly impact our GDP by 10 to 20%. So I hope this video was valuable to you. I'm going to come up with another series of this video, which is going to be how US dollar is being replaced by some other countries, because now we're seeing there's a bipolar or multipolar world, really, not really even a bipolar. There are multiple superpowers just popping up. Other countries are getting more richer, and that gap is filling up quite quickly, and how the US dollar is going to be replaced. So keep watching, and hope you like the video, and I'll see you later.